Okay, let's talk about using for loops in Java. So here I want to write a program that rolls 3 six-sided dice. So basically, if you've ever played a dice game, you roll one six-sided dice, then you roll another and another, and that's all this program is going to do. So it's going to loop 3 times, and I'm going to need to generate some random numbers, so I'm going to go ahead and import the Java util.random object so that I can have that available. Alright, now we're going to loop 3 times, and to do this we're going to create a for loop structure, and this is the way it looks. For, and then we've got our condition block here, or conditions within the paragraphs, and then we got the code block there that will hold all the code that we're going to repeat over and over again. And I'll put a little note at the end, for 3 times, or 3 rolls. And I'll format this a little better, make it easier to read. Okay, so the code is going to go in here. Loop code. And here is where we're going to put all of the variables and conditions in order to make this for loop go. And there's basically 3 things that we want to have in here. And so the 3 things are going to be separated by semicolons. And I'm just putting in some little fillers in here, but we want to do what's called initialization, then we're going to put a semicolon, then we're going to do what's called termination, or when the loop is to terminate, semicolon, and then we're going to do the increment. And that's how much our iterator is going to go up every iteration. Okay, so there's a new term, iteration. That means to loop. And so we need a variable that will track how many times we've iterated, and we call that the iterator. And to make things simple, we'll call it I. And so what we do is we declare a loop variable, which is an integer, and we'll call it I. And we'll often set it to 0, although it's set to 0 by default, but we can go ahead and say int I equals 0. And what this says is that we have done no iterations yet. So at the beginning, there have been no iterations done. Now, because we've declared I within this for loop, it's called a loop variable, and I, the scope of I, is only going to be available during this block. So after this loop is over, if we try to access I, it's not going to know what I is, because I has been declared in the loop. It's a loop variable. Okay, so now we got to talk about the termination, and this is the conditions that, when true, are going to stop the loop from happening. And usually we say I equals less and then whatever number that we want to loop to, or how many times we want to do the loop. So in this case we want to loop 3 times, because I'm going to roll the dice 3 times. And so while I is less than 3, it's going to loop. So when I starts, it's going to be 0, and then it'll count up to 1, and then 2, and then when it gets to 3, it'll stop, and it will have done the loop 3 times. Okay, the last part is the increment, and that is how much we want the iterator to increment every time. And usually we put I++. That means that every time we do a loop, we want the loop to go up 1 time. So that we do 1 loop, it's 1, we do 2 loops, it's 2, and so on. And we show that by using the I++, which means increment I by 1, or up 1. Okay, so now we're ready to put in the actual code that we're going to do over and over again. And I'm going to just print out my rolls. So I'm going to do system out print line. And within this print line, I'm going to call my random objects method, which is the next integer. But I don't actually have that here, so I've got to create a random object. So I'll go ahead and do that right within my main method. I'll say random. I'm going to call the new random object I'm going to create. I'm going to call it rand1, or I'll just call it rand, equals new random, and I'll call the constructor here. So now I've got a random object called rand, and I can call on rand by calling its methods. And one of its methods that it has is the next integer. And that is a method which will generate large numbers, so I want to reduce the scope, and so I'm going to put 10. And what this will do is this will generate a number between 0 and 9, which is actually 10 numbers, but I actually want to go from 1 to, actually this is a 6-sided dice, so it should be 6. And that'll generate a number between 0 and 5. I want 1 through 6, so this is not going to work, so I've got to add 1 to the outcome. So instead of being 0 to 5, it'll be 1 to 6. The problem is that since I'm within the print line method, that plus is going to be seen as a concatenation operator and not an addition operator. And so in order to make sure that it's treated as an addition operator and not a concatenation operator, I've got to surround the whole thing in parentheses. That will make sure that it adds as opposed to concatenates. So I'll go ahead and compile it. I forgot my M at the end of system. Okay, now that it's compiled, I can go ahead and let me clear this. Call the main method, and it rolls 3 numbers, 2, 6, 3. So that's basically exactly what I wanted it to do. It's within range. There's no zeros, there's no sevens. It seems like that's pretty good. All right.